about 2 years ago, I thought this. I heard this new thing coming up, CSS precompilers, and I thought, that's silly. Who needs that? I can write CSS, I don't need something to compile for me. And, well, I stuck with it. I looked at it, didn't like it, and went ahead. About at the same time, CSS3 came along, or it came out big, and the browser supported it, and it was awesome. Everybody got excited about it. And pretty much exactly the same time, you realized, okay, the browser supported, but they all do it differently. They all need a special syntax. It's so not going to be fun. So about a half a year later or so, I think it was on Twitter, I found Live Reload. Who has heard about Live Reload? That's very few. You're missing out. Live Reload was awesome. Live Reload allows me to simply forget that thing that I've been doing for about 12 years, which is I'm editing something, I'm switching to the browser, I hit Command R, or back then it was F5, who remembers that on Windows, to see what has changed. Now, Live Reload does that for me, clever enough. You can find it on livereload.com. What they say about themselves is, it's the web developer wonderland, a happy land, blah, blah, blah. They are right. It is really cool. It saves me a lot of stuff. What it also says is things about CoffeeScript, SASS, less. The dimension CoffeeScript is already a reason why I stopped looking at it again, and I just ignored it further. They keep saying, oh yeah, you don't have to reload your browser, and that's the part I like, and that's awesome. Fact, I still don't know SASS. Obviously, at the same time, I started to really get into gradients. Who has written a gradient that is to be used cross-browser? How many of you liked it? Yeah, that's okay. It looks like this. That's awesome. That's so many lines. That's actually the most recent version with the most recent, just again changed background syntax that nobody understands, I think, except in Explorer 10. This is so much fun. And it's great to do that once. Imagine at one point when you just change that, your designer comes along and says, oh, actually that color, like about a third from the right, that needs to be something else. And you have to write it all over again. That's a lot of fun. So, after having looked into Live Reload, this is Live Reload. It's not pretty, I agree. It's very useful. After having looked into Live Reload quite a couple of times, this teeny tiny button over there, it says compile SASS less stylus. It was always there. I always kind of saw that. I always kind of ignored that. But OK, I'm really annoyed about all those extra browser extensions. So let's have a look. I have to mention at the same time, who has heard about CodeKit? Even less people. CodeKit is absolutely awesome. It's kind of like Live Reload, but pretty. But it's not quite the same. It does everything that you want it to. It does actually more than Live Reload, as it optimizes your JavaScript, it combines it, it handles it, it lints it, it's awesome. What it doesn't do, and that's the reason why I don't really want to use it or can use it, that it does only reload my local WebKit browser that is controllable using AppleScript, which kind of excludes Firefox or Opera. It reduces it to Safari or Chrome, essentially. And as I do a lot of testing on Windows and on mobile devices, it kind of makes it useless for me. But it's great. Remember CodeKit? It's pretty cool. So again, I saw that little button in Live Reload, thinking, OK, I give it a go. If it's really just checking this little box, let's give it a try. So I looked into SASS. Because, well, I looked around, and that seems to be the choice, the weapon of choice, really. And what SASS talks about themselves is that it makes CSS fun again. And just after that incident of realizing CSS is so not fun, having to write 9 lines of CSS to do a gradient, that's pretty much exactly what I want. So I do what I think, what the website says. I install the SASS gem. And I do this on my command line, and seconds later, I'm just desperate. It doesn't work, it gives me weird errors. So, thank you, Stack Overflow. Obviously, I'm on a Mac. I can't just install a gem, I have to sudo install it. So there you go, add some sudo, and it's much, much nicer now. So, what can this thing do? Mixins. Mixins, who's heard about mixins? That's more people than heard about SASS. You're cheating. Never mind. This is a mixin. A mixin is a reusable chunk of code. You define it, see how this work? You define it with the mixin syntax, you give it a nice name, and you can just plug any kind of content into your mixin, and then you can reuse it by just including it. Over and over again, it will just return that piece of content. This is really nice if you have repetitive code. We've just seen a lot of repetitive code, right? So, if I wouldn't have live reload, this is what I would have to do to convert my new SASS file that I just created, or a folder if I want to do. Luckily, I don't have to, because it does it for me. So, after having compiled it, live reload did that for me. This is what the CSS looks like. It really just extracted everything that was SASS before. It returned exactly what I wanted. That's awesome, that's pretty useful. So, what makes them really useful is that mixins also can have params. So you can define as many params as you want to. In this case, I'm defining linear gradients, so I want a from and to for the most simple one. And then I can just reuse those variables or params in my code, in my mixin. Excellent. So, taking my beautiful code that we saw earlier and pack this in a mixin. And I'm going to pass, again, from and to. I'm going to default to a super old school browser that has never heard about gradients, and just give them one of the numbers. And I'm going to use every other syntax that the world knows, down to the most current one. And I'm even supporting with Internet Explorer here. I'm just going to add this variable over and over again. Awesome. And this is what's supposed to look like. I use my new style, my new mixin. I give it two nice colors, and I'm going to compile it. And it's compiled. And what it does is it beautifully replaces all the variables. It looks great. And I go all the way down. I'm happy. Everything looks great. Looks awesome. And what exactly happened here in Internet Explorer, even if it's not involved, it drives me crazy. This is so mean. So, after having the regular rage, you look into the docs. This is what the docs look like. They're actually really useful and nice. The docs tell me about interpolation. So interpolation, I'm totally going to underuse it in this case, but what it does is it basically allows me to have a dynamic embedding of variables in a special context. Why I do need that is because my variables down here, they are not just in the regular CSS syntax, they are in a string. And SASS, reading this in a string, thinks it's just a string and ignores it. So to make SASS interpolate that, I need to use this hash and the curly brackets around my variable, and then I can use my gradient mixin again, and it actually works everywhere. Awesome. And I can reuse it with all kinds of colors. And I never have to write prefixes ever again, ever. Okay, that's all I needed. I'm convinced I really like this. What else is there? Nesting. Nesting, one of the most beautiful features in terms of it actually looks nice. Who of you has ever thought it would be nice if I could just like have a module in a module in a module and just have it like more belong together than just sitting next to each other? This is exactly what it does for you. So what I can do is I can go ahead and define my module navbar. And in there I have a couple of properties, width and height, completely normal. And in there, now I'm actually starting to nest. In my navbar, I have an unordered list. And in there, I have a list element. And in there, I have an anchor. And what this compiles to is this. Even though it's kind of tricky here because we're using the nested indentation, this is actually just regular CSS that it does for you. It does all the nesting for you. It finds out, okay, this is my UL in my navbar, so I'm writing navbar UL. And it does that all the way down the chain, and it just outputs regular CSS. But what you write is so much more visual as a module. This got me really excited. And like everybody, I completely overused it. So a word of warning here, it is beautiful to just nest your stuff down the line. You end up having ridiculously long selectors. We all know those are not really a good idea. So I suggest you use nesting, but you think about the CSS that you actually want to have afterwards, because that's what it has to reflect. So if you have a selector that is a mile long, you're probably doing it wrong. So something else that I found seriously cool, and only found after looking into the docs, because I never would have come up with myself, you can actually nest parts of properties as well. So this is something that CSS obviously can't do at all. I just say, okay, in my fake shadow class, I have a border. And in there, I have border style. And in there, I have border left. And the left has a width, and the left has a color. And it just inherits down the line beautifully. This is something that is so clever that I keep forgetting about it, but every time I read about it, I think, oh yeah, I want to use this so badly. I promise at one point I will use it, but I suggest you do it. It's great. You can nest. Awesome. So, one of the things that came up in you have to have is the parent selector. The parent selector gives you the chance to actually reference upwards the chain. This is something obviously CSS can't do itself, and this only works inside of a chain inheritance. So what you can do is we have our outer selector for an anchor, and the ampersand here is representing this anchor in the inheritance. What I can do is I can just use it. So by default, you can see by default it's going to be A, and there's a space, and that's the property, right? So if you want the two to be together, as in for the SUSE selectors, hover and active, etc., you have to use the selector so they are together. That's the easy part. The awesome part is when you then need to add some extra classes. For example, if you think about what Modernizer does, it gives you all those browser prefixes you can use. You can then just use that browser prefix here and have your inheritance in there, your parent selector, and it outputs the selector upwards. That's really, really nice. You're going to use this a lot. I might have not mentioned that in the beginning. If you have any questions along the way, just shout out. I'm very open to questions. Has anybody used that already? Handful, okay. What you totally use every time, everybody, is variables. That's something that comes up every time people talk about regular CSS. Oh, I want to have variables. I'm bored of rewriting all my colors all the time. You can't do it in CSS. They're working on it. It's going to take a while. In SASS, you can have it right now. In SASS, you can just go ahead and define all kinds of strings or colors, or in this case, a color or a style. Just predefine it with $, and you have this variable defined. You can reuse it everywhere in your file, and it will just be replaced to whatever it is. It also has a hierarchy. So if I would, for example, define my main color inside of navbar, it would not apply down here, and vice versa. So you have a very nice chain of inheritance. If you go to the root, like I did here, it is just available in all of your CSS file, in your SASS file, and it will be replaced. This is something that I use a lot for things like theming. I'm working on the mail client for Yahoo, and the current mail client has about like 20 different themes. They're all going to use this syntax, and basically we have one big file that contains the actual templating, and every theme then is just a little part of variables that we just modify really easy and quickly. It's beautiful. We used to do this much more complex. Functions are extremely valuable. What they give you is beautiful little things like, okay, I have my link color. I define it as my variable. That's easy. We just learned that. And imagine you hover over that link. What you usually do is you want some kind of visual feedback. I just hovered over this link. What you tend to do is, oh yeah, let's find a color that represents that. And you talk to your designer, and your designer looks it up, and they eventually come back with a color that might fix. What actually is much, much quicker, especially thinking in the theming context where you just have lots of color sets, is you can use lighten or darken together with a percentage, and actually just take this number, this color that you put in, and it will modify it on the fly and output the colors for you. This is incredibly easy. Theming has never been that fun. Talking about fun. Calculations. Talking about not fun. Who knows this bad boy? Oh, you lucky bastards. You don't know the box model? It's broken beyond repair. So what you do to have to style a box is obviously a box has not really just a width. It has its width that you define. It has a left padding, it has a right padding. It has a border on the right, it has a border on the left. And that, whatever it is at that very point, ends up being the width. It is painful, and it is actually something that you have to think about a lot if you're supporting older browsers. I'm one of those. So let's calculate that, because we don't have to do that ourselves anymore. So we want to say our box is 100 pixels, and when I mean 100 pixel, it actually should end up being 100 pixel, not what the browser thinks is a good idea. So I'm going to define my border is 3 pixels, I add some padding of 10, I add some margin of 10, and then I'm using calculation in SASS. And I'm defining, okay, my margin doesn't affect my box model, I don't care. My padding is my padding. My border is my border. And then my width, that's the critical part. I just go ahead and use my width and subtract the border and subtract the padding. And I end up having exactly the number that I would never been able to calculate myself, because I suck at math. 74 pixels, who would have thought? This is something that gets me excited. Does that get you excited? Oh, the excitement. It's late, I know. Percentage, excellent question. Actually, you can calculate all kinds of units. You can use percentages to calculate. You can use m's to calculate. There's actually a built-in amount of predefined relations. So SASS knows how many pixels an m has. It knows how many pixels an inch has, and is able to convert those in between. So you can actually take 2 m's and subtract 20 pixels. That works. It's pretty cool. Yes?
Where you could say foreground, background color, you can actually define a minimum contrast level. So you can make sure that the font text, I couldn't find that reference. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, excellent question. So there is a built-in function that I would have looked up. I'll look into it after the talk. There's a function that actually gives you a color contrast, and you can give them a max color contrast and a minimum color contrast, and give you the ideal between the two. It works beautifully. So, add import. That's something that we know from CSS, right? Who's using CSS add import at the moment in CSS? I'm really sorry to say, but the problem with add import in CSS, oh, you know, found it too. The problem with add import in CSS is that it doesn't actually import. It takes your CSS, it finds an add import, it loads that file, and then it finds another one, and it loads that file. It ends up in loading a lot of files, and it just has so many HTTP requests. The beauty of add import in SASS is that it actually doesn't import. It includes the files. So on the left, I have my one SASS file that I use to compile, and I'm telling, okay, import my file here, import this other file, import this third file, and it ends up being one file. No kitten has to die. So that's cool, that's SASS, but there's more. The thing that I find most beautiful about SASS is actually not SASS itself. It's Compass. Compass is a CSS framework that sits on top of SASS and basically gives you a lot of extra stuff around. So what it says about itself is that it's an open source CSS authoring framework. That sounds really interesting. I think it's just a beautiful, excellent mixed set of CSS mixins, functions, helpers, and extra tools that make it really, really awesome. So who's using Compass at the moment? That's again a whole different set. You're cheating. So the way to get Compass is, again, you go to your command line, and you just tell Ruby to update its gems, and then install the Compass gem. And then you celebrate because you didn't forget to use sudo this time. Yes, makes me proud. So, and what you can then do is you can initialize a new Compass project by just going to a folder that you just created and tell them to install Compass and to tell Compass to watch this one folder. And what the watch means, it's basically doing what live reload is supposed to do, so we can ignore that because live reload does it. What the installation does when you say Compass install is it creates nothing but this little Ruby config file. So you can just do this by hand. What I'm doing is I have one of those, and I just copy them into a new project. I don't have to go to anything else. The couple of things that are important in there is really just, where does my CSS live? Where does my SASS live? Where do my images live? Yes, those are important as well. And the JavaScript. And then you have a Compass project, and suddenly have the possibility to do this. You can import Compass, and Compass gives you all this beautiful power that I just mentioned. You have suddenly so much power over CSS3. Remember that gradient mixin that we built in the beginning? Throw it away, because you don't need it, because Compass has that built in. And the important part is, I had to update that mixin when the new gradient syntax came out, because suddenly the gradient syntax was unprefixed in Internet Explorer 10, and everything I had before was broken, and I had to go through and I had to update this gradient syntax. You don't have to do that, because all you have to do is you have Compass installed, and you say Compass update, and then everything will be recompiled, and you suddenly have the new syntax that is done for you. You don't have to think about stuff like that anymore. That is convenience. Convenience is good. It gives you all those nice mixins. You can change the backgrounds, you can change the gradients, you have box sizing, you have box shadow, flexbox is beautiful in there. Everything that is basically new and hot in CSS3 is there and documented nicely. There's a special font face syntax that generates all the nice bulletproof font face syntax for you. Gradients, I mentioned that. Hyphenation is great. Text shadows, regions, transitions, transforms, those are the two I use the most, because writing those by hand, damn, that is painful. So, having spoken about the box model, obviously, being the prototyper in my team, I don't have to care about Internet Explorer that much anymore. So, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to use box sizing. Who has heard about box sizing? Yes. Are you all using it? No? You should. It's awesome. Paul Irish actually published a little article. It's linked down there. Read about it. It's really, really cool. What it does is it basically makes the box model that was considered broken in Internet Explorer 4 back in the days. It rolls it across every single browser that is today and basically gives you a box model that ignores everything about padding and margin and borders. It just, when I tell a box to be 100 pixel wide, it actually ends up being 100 pixel wide. I know, it's crazy. This is the first line I write in every project. Highly recommended. So, remember that gradient that we did earlier? This is what I can now do, because I don't have to care anymore. And actually, I get even more support. By using this little toggle up here, I'm actually adding support for older operas who are unable to do that as well. And it will generate an SVG dynamically for me to be then spanned across an old opera background. It's beautiful. And then I can use the background image mixin that Compass gives me, and I'm passing in a linear gradient, and I'm telling them where to go and what colors to use, and some information about my box. And this is what it expands to. Now that looks terrible, but it's dynamic. I don't have to care anymore. What I care is about this. This is beautiful, this is maintainable, I don't have to write it once. This is done for me, and I don't care anymore. This up here is a base64 encoded SVG that is never going to be used other than in old Opera. You don't have to do this, it's an experimental feature, but it actually makes this ultimate cross-browser experience beautiful. And then it will just write every single one of these and it works out. You can actually see that this is still the old syntax. They're going to update Compass very soon. It will come out before Internet Explorer 10 come out. And what it does is it will just update this for me. I know this is currently outdated. The beauty is I don't care. I just have to update Compass once it's there and it will work. So obviously I still have to think about how a gradient looks like by myself, right? I have to actually find the colors. No, I do not. Tools like this, and it has a very subtle naming here, Ultimate CSS3 Gradient Generator. I'm actually pimping this because it is the ultimate solution. You can just take an image of a gradient that you found somewhere and upload it there, and it will extract you the perfect CSS gradient out there. This is so cool. And beauty is, it also, besides just generating CSS, it can also generate SASS for me using the Compass syntax. So I can just go ahead, upload an image, get my SASS, go back, and actually have this epic code that generates a crazy amount of CSS behind the scenes. But it just works, and it looks great. Highly recommended. This is free. What is not free, but actually a little bit more awesome still, is CSS Head. And CSS Head completely rolled over me in the same way that SASS kind of did, because I thought, okay, this is a tool that is obviously not needed for me because I'm grown up and I can write CSS. And I don't need this tool. What this tool does is it lives in Photoshop. Being a coder, having a tool that helps me in Photoshop was kind of like, I don't need that. I went to a designer who has that installed. I looked at it and I loved it and I paid for it and it's awesome. What it does is you can just select a layer in Photoshop that has a gradient, that has text with a shadow, that has an overlay with another gradient. One of those things that is painful to actually reconstruct by yourself. And just by clicking at this layer, it will give you the source to do the same thing in CSS. And again, it not only outputs for CSS, it also outputs SASS for me with the necessarily Compass mixins, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's a bit of a pride going away because, okay, I'm relying on tools to do that for me, but knowing that I could do it myself makes me feel okay. And it saves so much time. You have no idea. So this is cool. Going back to Compass. What it also comes with, other than saving me a lot of typing, is that it actually has a lot of thought through best practices already built in. So about, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, probably not that long ago, I fell in love with inline block. Because inline block helps me solve all those problems that floats kind of gave me. Floats always end up being painful at one point. You have all those columns and it doesn't wrap anymore. And I keep hitting this. And it gets really painful using floats. Inline block works around this beautifully by just having all the beauty of a block element, but being able to style it or to be aligned horizontal, for example. So the thing is, obviously, it's not 100% cross-browser, right? So wanting to be an element, to be inline block, actually required me to write some extra code. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to say, you, box, I want you to be inline block. And what SASS does, Compass does behind the scenes for me is writing all this code, and it's actually clever enough to go outside and write some extra, this is a hack for Internet Explorer for me, to be able to actually use this cross-browser just like that. This is such a time saver. And I never had any problems with any Internet Explorer stuff anymore. What I actually end up doing is I just code away, and when I open it in a browser that I haven't tested before, I don't start screaming like I used to. It actually just looks like it's supposed to look. I hope you will have that eventually. Another thing is clear fixes. Obviously, this is a little more known, having worked with floats all the time. And clear fixes are not that problematic anymore, as you can today only say, okay, overflow hidden and zoom on. It expands it for me, so I still have to only write it once. What I still end up using, because overflow hidden is usually not what I want, I end up having something that needs to go out of the box, so I want to use the old school clear fix. And the old school clear fix is still in there, but it's subsetted in Pi. Pi is, in this case, a subsection of Compass. And who has heard about Pi? It's a special one. It's a special framework that uses JavaScript and all kinds of CSS hacks to emulate CSS3 for Internet Explorer. And everything that you know about Pi is built in Compass already. I rarely use it because I don't really want to have Internet Explorer all that beauty on being slowed down as hell, but this is something that I still use all the time. So that clear fix is usually what I go for instead of overflow hidden. And it writes it all for me, and it just allows me to use the float if I have to. Otherwise, yeah, inline block. And helpers are out there, and that is the stuff that keeps blowing my mind. So who's working with sprites, sprite sheets? Everybody. Who likes working with sprite sheets? You're a sick person. Or are you using this technique? Okay, I take it back. It's really, really painful working with sprites. You have to open Photoshop or Fireworks or whatever you're using. You're pushing pixels, you're moving your images together in one big thing. You do this to reduce HTTP requests because, you know, the kittens, don't remember the kittens? You do this all for the kittens. You build this massive image, and then you have to measure where is this image, and it's really, really not fun. And the moment you remove an image because it's outdated and replace it, you have to calculate every single location again, and it's just not fun. So Compass does something seriously awesome, and that's one of the things that I have not found in any of the other CSS precompilers, which is why I will stick with Compass for now. It allows me to just point Compass to a folder of PNGs. And what it gives me is not only all those images in one folder combined into one big image, no, it also generates all the CSS needed to find every single image in this big sprite sheet. And that just keeps blowing my mind. So what I'm doing is, I'm telling, okay, I'm importing Compass, and I'm going to use my folder icon. There's a folder icon, which is in my images folder, and I'm going to tell Compass to just use everything, every PNG that is in there. And then I'm going to include all icon sprites. Icon in this case is, again, the name of the folder. So if my folder would be blah, it would be all blah sprites. And it then went ahead, go ahead and finds every image in there. So in this case, there's 4 images. The first image is sprite, it's attachment, it's delete, it's reply. And it generates this new PNG for me, and it includes it. And then there's more of those. It will then write a new style for every PNG in there. So I can simply go ahead and use this class. And wherever I attach this class, I know this sprite will turn up. Mind-blowing. This is what it looks like. This is my folder full of sprites. This is what it does for me. Beautiful, and it even sorts it by size. Not that it's relevant. More importantly, because I'm actually not much of a fan of having my CSS dictate how I have to write my HTML, so I don't want to attach a class called icon attachment sprite to an element that should have an attachment sprite. So instead of that, you can define your own classes and include one sprite specifically. So I can just say, okay, that element in my HTML that is already there, that I don't have to change anymore, you have this icon sprite, and it will just apply them, just like this. And what you see, I also used some extra icon spacing, because in the version that we had before, they're actually really close together, which is slightly unpractical, because you just have to change line height a little bit, and the others sneak out. So adding a little of line height is awesome. Or use diagonal sprites. Diagonal sprites came up like a year or two ago, and they're really clever if you have like a list of elements. I know, I saw that face. And you have a list of elements, and that element, every element in there has a different icon, and you don't want to mix around, and you don't have to fuck around with all these positions. Because what it does is it will simply cut out that one element in there. And yes, I know there's a bit of a downside, because it is actually not much bigger, the sprite, than the other one. So it loads the same way. But once it's loaded in your browser, it will be extracted. It will be the full-blown image, and then it's actually bigger than the original one, which ends up using more RAM. That's the downside. I still love them for special links. So I have one of those like navigation elements where every single element has a different sprite image in there. This is what I'm using there. I'm not doing this that big, but I'm using it, and it's really cool. So, sprites. Now, sprites give us all that HTTP reduction, which is really awesome, but it kind of limits me. One of the things that always drove me nuts with sprites is that I can't simply take an icon anymore and tell that icon to be right-aligned or left-aligned, and it will automatically be horizontally centered, because all the other icons in that sprite can't just be centered with it. So that's the one downside, and it's always a bit of a pain. So what I'm using in newer projects instead is I'm actually using an inline image. And with a syntax that looks surprisingly similar, I can just say inline image instead of sprite image, and it will just include, as we saw earlier, just include the whole image into my CSS using page 64. And I know this is, again, disgustingly ugly, and it looks terrible. And if you think about, oh yeah, but I have this icon more than once, yes, you can do that. gzip is actually your friend in this case, and if you have one icon more than once, it gzips out very nicely, so you don't actually have much of an overhead, and you can go ahead and use all those nice, nifty alignments. It has one downside compared to your regular CSS that links external files. Obviously, this CSS has to load completely first. So I'm using this in mobile apps, for example, where the CSS and all the images are already there. So I have one file, and it loads extremely quickly, rather than having one file that loads another file, that loads another file. This is where I use this, and I like it a lot. So another really nice helper is image width, and it comes with image height just as well. What it does is I can point it to my file that I just loaded, and I can tell, okay, give me what the width of this element, or height, if it's image height. And this makes it very flexible, again, in terms of handling icons, for example. If I have a background image that is an icon, my designer today decides this icon is 15 pixel height, and it's 20 pixel wide. And that's perfect. And I hard code, it's 10 pixel wide. Damn you. It's 10 pixel wide, and I add some padding of 10 pixels, and it works beautifully. And then in half a year, my designer decides, actually, those icons are now 30 pixel wide. What I have to do now is I have to run through my code and find all those widths and recompile them. What I don't have to do now is, because when I change this file, I will automatically recompile my file here, and whatever padding I decided to have, it is now there. This is really helpful. So this is all nice and great, but what you can't do anymore now is to actually change all that CSS in Firebug or in the Web Inspector, right? No, because there's a couple of extensions out there for Firefox as well as for WebKit that actually allow you to find what SASS file is behind the compiled CSS file, which is extremely useful. And I only found this not too long ago. Before that, I had exactly that problem. I did all my changes in SASS, I compiled them, I looked in the browser, and I thought, okay, there's something I need to fix. And because I used to do that, I opened my inspector, and I clicked around and I made it perfect, and then I had all those changes in my inspector and not in my SASS. And looking at my inspector, I wouldn't know where in my SASS file that information was. Now, these extensions give me exactly the line in the SASS file, and I can make my changes there. This is SASS for Firefox. This is SASSlove for WebKits. And having learned this this morning is knowing that it will actually be built into Chrome, not too far away, because it's already in the nightlies. And at one point, you can just turn it on, and it will automatically work. And you can actually go ahead and save your CSS, your SASS from there back into your project. Really cool. This is very close to WYSIWYG editing that we never wanted, but hey. The only thing that this needs is debug info. So what you need to do is you have to give this little information here in your Ruby config that we saw earlier in your Compass project. And what it will then do is it will do a massive mess. So what it adds is this extra code here that tells the extensions where to find that information. And this looks terrible, but you don't have to care about it, because once you compile for production, you can just tell them to not use this, and it will be trimmed down. So this is a one-way thing. You only need this for debugging, and I actually only turn it on when I really need to, because it's just so much extra code. But it's really valuable, and it really helps. So I was surprised nobody asked about this before. Yes, SASS is not the only CSS precompiler. So there's more. Let's talk about the others. Oh, you got that reference. I wasn't sure if it's too long ago. So the others, at least the other big ones, are Less and Stylus. And those two actually have one thing that I like about them. They're both driven by Node.js, so they nicely fit into your JavaScript stack if you have them. But I still prefer SASS, and I prefer it because of the things that I showed you in Compass. All those extra little tools that are so nicely thought out, they make SASS the winner. And there was a lot of talking about which is actually the right one, which is the winner. And I think Chris Coyer from CSS Tricks actually put it nicely. It is just the most mature, it has the least bugs, it has the best documentations. In my case, I extended it's the most fun to use because of Compass. He doesn't mention that, but I think that's the actual one. So concluding, and thank you very much.